they confirmed this to be true. They confirmed the fact that all of the mountain regions, we think very often they traveled through the lowlands, the river bottoms and the like. But contrary to that thought, generally they traveled the higher ridges. I'm speaking concerning the Indians now. They would have their trails along the higher ridges due to the fact there would be no undergrowth and they had a good view of the country. And that was the way in which that they could be directed by mountain peaks that were always on top to where they could look off and see, keep various mountain peaks in view. And it's hard for us to really imagine unless that we see something of this nature. Now, I had the privilege of visiting the Joyce Kilmer Forest near Robbinsville, North Carolina. And I get sort of an idea looking in the forest there of what this country once looked like. Because I saw trees there, and they are still standing for anyone to go and look at. Poplar trees, 10 feet in diameter, and so huge, so vast, until it's just almost unbelievable. It has been set aside as a national park in honor of Joyce Kilmer, the man that wrote the poem concerning the trees. I'm sure you are familiar with the poem. Now, speaking of the Cherokees' travel, it is not certain whether or not they had permanent village sites here in Ashe County or not. However, already I have picked up off of the surface objects such as arrow points and pottery and the like that is of the Cherokee making. Along the Muir River just recently I found a site that has definitely been occupied by the Cherokees because of the material that was left there. However, there seems to be a contamination of the material there because I also found that other Indians had occupied the same site. Now, how long that the Cherokees might have lived here and how many places, I don't know for sure whether it could ever be determined accurately or not. But we do know that they were here. And how many lived in this area, it is uncertain. And how long they might have lived. But I hope in the future to perform some excavations in various places to try to determine whether or not there is a permanent or long occupation of the Cherokees here. However, at times they were at warfare with the Catawbas that occupied this area. And they were also at warfare with the Creeks on up in Virginia. So it stands to reason that this was not an isolated place from the Cherokees.
Well, I've seen, some beautiful artifacts that I was told was Cherokee by the people who had collected them because they assumed, I'm sure that there were
some similarity as to design. Now, if we can find enough pottery on the surface, it would be easily to determine whether or not that it was Cherokee pottery.
I understand you date things in your, you can tell the approximate time it was.
Yes.
Well, good luck on your dig. Maybe I can.
Thank you.
Can
I
find
actually
it
say in
sometime.
Cherokee language, Wadon.
Wadon.
Right.
Oh, that's very good. Now, I think that part interests me as to thinking what it was, that say before the white man came. It must have been. It's so beautiful now, and of course we have our home snuggled in the mountains, and we've cut the timbers and all that kind of thing, that it undoubtedly must have been a sight to behold. Now, one thing struck me with interest. You mentioned, I've often thought that they followed the streams, but you mentioned the mountaintops. Is that why they never got lost? They were up where they could see familiar peaks?
That was one factor which that they used in order for directions, to travel the higher peaks. However, that doesn't mean that they restricted themselves to the river bottoms and the like, but certainly by all means, by traveling the higher peaks, they could see farther, know their directions, and have some strategic point as their point of direction.
You mentioned, I believe yesterday, that the Cherokee language doesn't have profanity.
That's right.
Do you think if you'd have had it, would the treaties be more likely to stick? Anyhow, I wanted to ask another question or two concerning the Cherokee Nation. Is there a record, or do you know who was here, say, before the Cherokee Indians, if there was another culture?
There is so many discrepancies between archaeologists, professional archaeologists, I might say, so much difference in opinions as to how long the Cherokees were here, or where they came from, until it would be almost impossible, I think, to say definitely who was here before. Now, I might illustrate like this. We believe that the Cherokees were a branch from the one of the northern tribes, I'll think of the name just in a moment, but the Iroquois. Yes, we believe that they were a branch of the Iroquois due to the fact that there is a similarity in language. And that is the only thing that we have that we could possibly base an idea that they were a branch of the Iroquois. However, some archaeologists say that they drift back through the period of time through what is known as the late Mississippi period, the early Mississippi period, the late Woodland period, and the early Woodland period, which would take us back to near 4,000 years ago. Now, I don't know, and I couldn't say under no circumstance that the Cherokees extended back that far. However, among the early woodland people, we have found objects that we would think were similar to the pattern of the Cherokees. So, who really knows? We just can't definitely say. But let me go into the chronological order, so to speak, of the supplanting of what we believe the supplanting of the North American continent. First is the Paleo period, of which that we find objects that is unlike any other. Now, the Paleo period, there's a big question concerning it. There has never been a skeleton of any kind found that could be dated to the Paleo period, which would go back farther than 9,000 years. However, there has been objects found that are entirely different from any other period. So there we leave the Paleo period and we come to the Archaic period. And we do find that among the Archaic people there was campsites set up, and there were fire hearths, cooking pits, but no permanent village sites. And there is scant evidence that they had begun to domesticate the dog. Then we come to the leaving the Archaic period into the early woodland period. And there we find a similarity. Among the early woodland people, we have found evidence that they used the bow and arrow. Never before among the other earlier groups have we found evidence of the bow and arrow. Now, a lot of people misconstrue the idea when they find a projectile point thinking it's an arrow point. Well, it could have been a spear point, because most of the arrow points were rather small and sharp. But on one excavation that I helped to perform, and I was the finder of an arrow shaft, charred and yet in good condition, on the early woodland site, a pure woodland site that had not been contaminated with other people. What I mean contaminated, there was no evidence of any other people ever living there before or after the early woodland period. And under the directions of Dr. T.M.N. Lewis of the University of Tennessee, I found this arrow shaft, and he was present when I uncovered it. And he viewed it, and we photographed it. And it was made from reed, river cane, and the carving dating on that site gave us 2,320 years, plus or minus 50 years. So we do know that among the early woodland period there was the bow and arrow. And then of course we lead out of the early woodland period into the mound builders period, coming later. And who were the mound builders? We truly don't know, except for the fact that from all probability they branched off from the early woodland people. And they built mounds up until about near 1,700 years ago. The first mound builders, of course, were the memorial mound builders that buried their dead in the mounds. And then later, they were used merely for structural purposes. And then, of course, after the memorial mound builders, other mound builders came who did not bury in the mounds, and they used them for strategic points. What I mean by that is they built houses on top of the mounds, the strategic point of the village. The village would be surrounded, but yet the mound would be built up very high, and then a house built on top of it. And we could go into years' conversation concerning the mound builders there, but this is just briefly a little sketch. Then, of course, after the mound builders, there was as I mentioned, the Mississippi period and the Middle Mississippi period, and then on up to the Late Mississippi period, of which it includes a part of the historical period after the white man came. Mm-hmm. Rather lengthy, I'm sure, but...
Well, that's great. Now, someone speculated, I don't know if they picked it up from a book, that the Ice Age could have pushed the Cherokee into this area. Can you identify, or can you relate anything to the Ice Age resettling the Indian nations?
No, really, I couldn't. Because the Ice Age, of course, would be so far back in history until it's hard for us to say just what people were here at the time of the Ice Age. However, it is highly possible that the Ice Age began waning at the late Archaic period, which is before, of course, the early woodland period.
Please turn tape.